yard.
Live streaming is
Barely 100 yards more than Derek Henry does by himself.
Huh. All right, guys, welcome to Socialize today. I just want to do kind of, we've been talking about, the other day we talked about basically the United States forming its own country. And when we formed our own country, we came up with our own constitution. And the United States Constitution is kind of based on, these four principles. Government by the people, there's limits on the government, there's structure, and the government has power. Structure would be the branches. Power, each one of those branches can do certain things. Limits on government, that's checks and balances, it's only three branches. And how they get their power is by us, because we vote who serve and represent us. So that's really some of the main principles that we have. So I want to just read some of this. It may sound dramatic to say the U.S. Constitution revolutionized the world, but exactly what it's done. Since the Constitution was adopted in 1791 as the foundation for government of the United States, nations across the world have created their own constitutions modeled after ours. What makes the U.S. Constitution so popular? The principles behind it. At the time it was written, the U.S. Constitution represented a complete reverse from the kind of governments people were used to. Autocratic, all-powerful system where citizens had little or no power. That'd be like a king or queen was in charge, and the people really didn't have any power. This, in the United States, for the first time, a group of citizens had freed themselves from that kind of government and created a brand new system where government was responsible for the people it governed. So where does the power come from? Every nation's government has sovereignty, absolute power within its own borders, answering to no higher authority. For much of history, most of the world's governments were based on a system of nobility, which the power is based on social class and passed down through families. That'd be the king and their family and so forth and so on. America's founders wanted to flip that on the head. They believed that in popular sovereignty, the principle of the government's power is derived from the people. So popular sovereignty may be the most fundamental idea behind the U.S. Constitution. You see in the first line, it says, "We the people." You also see in Articles 1, 2, and 3 of the Constitution where it creates a government whose officials are either elected by the people or chosen by representation who were elected by the people. Throughout the Constitution, you can see a common theme. The states have a say in almost everything. That may not sound like popular sovereignty at first, but it is. How? Article 4 guarantees that voters in each state will have the right to elect their own state government. So the ultimate power of state governments is in the people. That means even where the Constitution gives power to the states, it's actually giving power to the people who elect the state's governments. If you look closely at the government structure set up by the Constitution, you'll see how each part ultimately links back to us, the people. Okay. It says most historical governments didn't care what citizens thought about the government's actions. They didn't need to. When the people you govern don't have anyone to kick you out of power, who cares what they think? It was exactly the situation that got America's founders so steamed when they started a war in order to create their own government. Consent of the governed goes hand in hand with popular sovereignty. You can't have government power derived from its people if the government doesn't need the people's consents for its actions. Okay. And Patrick Henry says the governing persons are the servants of the people. So it's really our leaders serve us. And if they're not serving us, every 2 years, 4 years, you can vote them and put someone else in who you think is going to better represent you. Okay. So this is Constitution principles. So if you look in this box over here, when the Constitution was written, large groups of governed people did not have the power or consent. Women, people of color, enslaved people, and poor people who owned no land were denied the right to vote. The founders were all about escaping a power system based on birth and social class. Like most people at the time, they generally accepted that it was okay to deny power to these people based on their factors such as gender, or race. So our country slowly evolved where more people have gotten more power, and it's not completely equal. Consent of the government is found everywhere in the Constitution, even though you won't find those exact words. It's about how the members of the government are chosen. Under the Constitution, the government and the people give their consent approved by voting. They also expressed disapproval by voting. Let's pause for a reality check. In practical terms, we can see all citizens don't get to consent to everything the government does. Should we cry foul? No. First, take a closer look at what the Constitution doesn't intend for citizens to be quite as involved. It creates a republic, a government where citizens elect representatives to government. Those representatives are empowered to make all kinds of decisions. But if they displease too many citizens, the people might not consent to let them keep their jobs. And that would be just like how we vote them out. Okay, so we elect people, then those people make laws. If we don't like the laws they've made, then you vote them out. But they're actually like even at the state level, city level, town level, they're the ones that make the laws. But if we don't like those laws, we have a choice the next time the elections come up to vote someone else in. Okay. So it says most governments in the 1700s, including the British government, the Americans had just broken free from, had few, if any, limits on their power. Governments were usually led by kings or similar figures who gained power by birth and could essentially do anything they felt like doing. Even in places like Great Britain, where society had demanded some limits on government, the starting point was unlimited power. Reform movements aimed to restrain that power. By contrast, the Constitution's starting point is limited government. Under this principle, a government only has the power that's been given to it. To understand how the Constitution limits government, you need to understand what is actually created in the Constitution. Each state was basically an independent nation, agreed to cooperate with other states. The men who attended the Constitutional Convention wrote the Constitution as representative of the state they lived in when they wrote Articles 1, 2, and 3. They created the three branches of the United States government and assigned each branch certain powers. The starting point was the states were the source of the federal government's power. The only power the federal government would have was the power assigned to it in the Constitution. The states and the people would keep the rest. So what we have here, a couple things. Federalism is a really important term, this one right here. And that basically, it divides power between the state and the federal government. That's why there's federal laws and there's state laws. Okay, so basically the state has some power and the federal government has some power. And that's kind of what a system of federalism is. It's, the small and the large each have power. Okay, so federalism divides power between the states and the federal government. Okay. All right, time for another reality check. Today's federal government doesn't seem very limited, so what's up? In one sense, nothing has changed. Americans still operate on the principle that government is limited to what the Constitution says it can do, but over time, several changes have evolved. For one thing, society's idea about the role of government has changed. Today, Americans generally feel it's appropriate for the government to keep an eye on everything from airline safety to food contamination and children's well-being. For another thing, what the Constitution says requires interpretation because it doesn't say much. And the Constitution has been interpreted differently over time. In many cases, that has led to an expanded view of what the federal government's powers actually are. Okay, so obviously, I'm going to stop there, but I want to talk about kind of what that means. Obviously, when the Constitution was written, it was 1770s, 1780s. We finally adopted in 1790s. Okay. Obviously, technology has really changed. I'm sure they didn't envision cell phones, the internet, things like that. So when today they interpret the Constitution, they have to kind of apply to, modern times. And, some people argue that the Constitution is a kind of living document, meaning it's kind of evolved. There's other people who are strict constitutionalists who think it should be interpreted exactly as it was written, but things have really changed over these 200 and some years. So it's kind of a balancing act of, you have to realize that our country has changed. We've evolved as people, our technology has evolved, things like that. So that's really when people try to interpret the Constitution, there's some judges that look at it, well, it's kind of a living document, people have evolved. Then you have other judges who want to interpret exactly what it says. And that's where we have a lot of, controversy in our country about, is the Constitution a living document? Does it grow, evolve, or is it strictly supposed to be interpreted exactly as it was written? So that's really what a lot of some of the controversies we have today, evolve around, how we interpret our Constitution. So I'm going to stop there. We will pick this up probably next week. I'll go ahead and post this though, and you can certainly keep, reading. There's more about the Constitution. There's some, it gets into really the articles of the Constitution here. Then it talks about constitutional principles, and we will go over the constitutional principles in next class. All right, you guys, have a great day, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.